songwriting is about storytelling. It's about communicating emotion through music, and scoring for film exactly the same thing. You're just getting a handle for the tone and the twists and turns in the story and what kind of atmosphere you're trying to create with the film. We can do that. We know how to do that with music. What we didn't know how to do was how to press the buttons and make the studio work and all of like the technical stuff.
Hello and welcome to the Blue Moggy Podcast. My name is Rachel Stevens. I am a writer, director, producer and all-around filmmaker, and on this show I talk to people who work in the film and media industry about the work that they do, how they got into their chosen field, and also share some stories, tips and advice along the way. In future episodes of the Blue Moggy Podcast, you can expect to hear from cinematographers, documentary filmmakers, people working within artist moving image, as well as talent agents and actors. But on this episode of the podcast, I was joined by Wood and DiElle, who are musicians and film and TV composers. Chris and DiElle joined me at City Eye in Southampton, where we recorded this episode in City Eye's sound suite. The pair talk about how they got into music individually and how they met and started working together, as well as talking about how they started working in film and TV, and we talked about a few projects they've worked on and some other bits. You'll notice probably from the runtime that this episode is longer than the other episodes so far, probably because this is the first episode with 3 people talking. It's not just me and a guest, it's me and 2 guests. So that had an effect on the runtime, but also there are moments when Chris and DiElle are talking about particular pieces of music that they've worked on. So we've put in a little sample of the music in the episode so you can hear what we were referring to in the conversation at that point. But considering the runtime of this episode, I'm going to wrap up the intro now just by saying that this podcast is produced by Blue Moggy Media, and I'll hand over now to me and Chris and DiElle talking about film and music. Chris and DiElle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Yay.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for being here. I want to talk to you about a lot of things. We were just talking, how do you start with where did your music journey start? I mean, that's
Shall I go first? How long have we got? So I wanted to be a drummer when I was a kid. My dad was a professional jazz trumpet player, and he got me a pair of drumsticks when I was. I don't know how old, far back do you want to go? Because when I was a kid, there was a show on TV called Record Breakers with Roy Castle, and at the end of the show, they had a band, and they used to play the theme music. The band used to play the theme music, and my dad got me a set of drumsticks from the drummer in the band at Record Breakers. I was beside myself with joy. I never did become a drummer. I never had a drum kit. At some point, I don't remember when it was. I wish I did, but I don't. I wanted to be a bass player. I discovered the band Madness. I learned everything that they recorded. And when I was when I was about 17, I got a job through my dad. With my dad's help, I got a job working for a company in Essex who used to produce what we used to call Muzak. So like instrumental versions of hits for shops and hotels, and we've all heard them. And that was kind of my first professional music job, I think. I'd been gigging with my dad since I was 13 years old. I then went to the Musicians Institute. I can never say that. Musicians Institute.
We haven't been drinking.
When I was 17, and then from then on, music is what I've done. I've been very lucky. I've played all over the world. I've played in dead-end pubs. I've played in stadiums. I've played all over the world. But that's a potted history of my journey. That's 40 years right there in 10 minutes.
I briefly had some drumming lessons and very quickly learned I don't have rhythm. So being a drummer was not an option for me.
I just don't think I fancied the constant lugging around of equipment.
Sure, yeah.
That always seemed like a downside to me.
Also played drums, and that was why I gave it up, because I knew that if I was going to play drums in a band, I would want an acoustic kit, and I had a back injury at the time, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to. I just physically couldn't carry it. It is like moving house every time you have a gig.
You're the first one at a gig and the last one away.
Yeah. I thoroughly enjoyed drumming lessons, though. I think every hospital and every office block and anywhere where your work is stressful, everywhere should have a drum booth where you can just go in and just play the drums, just shut yourself in a soundproof room and play the drums for 5 minutes and then go back to work.
I agree.
Stress relief.
Yeah.
And what about you, Dia? Where would you, in terms of taking music professionally, where did that sort of start for you?
Well, I think it was probably more of a slow burn for me than for Chris. Much like Chris, had really early exposure. I think, the music that my mum used to listen to when she was pregnant with me, I think is responsible for a lot of it. And there was just always a lot of music in the home. My dad was a musician when he lived in London as a young man, and he was really keen for me to have to just be educated. So I think I had piano lessons from when I was 5. I sang in the school choir from when I was 5. I started performing singing when I was 8. Both of my grandmothers are really musical. My mum used to sing all the time, so it was just everywhere. And then at some point along the journey, people started paying me for it, and I was thinking. Fairly recently, I was thinking, actually, I think my first paid gigs, if you can hear the air quotes that I'm doing, I sang in the church choir with my mum from probably when I was maybe 9 years old. And we used to get paid to sing at weddings. And I think that was probably the first money I ever earned, actually, thinking about it. And I'd just merrily forgotten all about that. So and then and I was in bands. I was in bands as a teenager, and then every now and then someone would bung you a fiver, and busking, stuff like that I used to do. But yeah, when it came to actually sort of going into music full time, I had a bit of a squiffy journey, really, because although I always wrote, so I'm a singer-songwriter, and my label is artist, really, I suppose. I always wrote and I always performed, and I always did that. For, like I say, since I was a child. And when it came to careers day at school or whatever it was, they're going around the classroom saying, what do you want to be when you grow up? Pick your life, kind of thing. And I'd been having training at school, had some exceptionally good training at school on voice. And I told my form tutor, who, with the greatest love, was a biology teacher, that I wanted to be a singer, and she just said no. She just said, no, you can't do that. So I sort of dealt with that for quite a while, actually. Just lots of people saying, don't be so crazy, don't and I spent a long time trying to find something else that would fill that void. And I did have some can we say normal jobs? I did have some normal jobs, or I think I've probably had more normal jobs than Chris has. I think you've worked in music.
But it's interesting what you said there, because I had the same experience at school, because my music teacher, would you believe, told me that music wasn't a career.
Wow.
And to use a modern word that I'm not a fan of, it's like literally what you do. He said, music's not a career. It's literally what you do. Literally. You do that. Yeah. So it's funny you had the same experience. I don't know if it's the same though, because we teach quite a few. Well, we teach a few young people, and they seem to have much better music experience at school than certainly I had.
So from a non-musical person at school, certainly at secondary school, my music teachers didn't care if you didn't play an instrument. They would. My music lessons, they would focus on the ones that were playing instruments, and the rest of us were just pissing about on keyboards. It wasn't a class. We weren't taught anything.
Yeah. Somebody said to me, so I won't say who, but I think she has authority to talk about education. As a friend of mine who's very skilled in education. She said to me years ago that her experience of the arts at school were that it was about taking the people who already could and making them amazing, and everybody else just went by the wayside. I think it's probably fair to say that was my classroom experience, and all of the training that I have was all independent. Right. So and that's voice, guitar, music business, artist development, production, composition. All of the stuff that we've done has all been independent training, which has been great because I've kind of cherry picked who I wanted to work with, and we've had that's a royal we. Sorry, I've had an atypical journey to where we are now, but I've made it how I wanted to. You know, there's so many people who, you know, amazing musicians who do music at university, for example, and a lot of them end up with, you know, going into the same kinds of jobs, and that's all fine if that's what you want to do. But I think, yeah, my misery years of trying to be normal, I did have some amazing jobs. I worked in mental health for the NHS, and that has been, I left because the system was difficult, not because I didn't like the work. And music was massive there. I mean, you know, I spent a lot of time communicating with people who have got some of the worst problems you can imagine. But you could talk to them about, like, oh man, have you heard this, you know, this Dido album, or what do you think of this Pink Floyd track, or, you know, just putting some music on, and it was still a way that you could communicate with people. And I think that's something that's come back in my life over and over. And I think, looking back, that was my dad's mum that instilled that in me. So one of my earliest memories is of being underneath the piano when I was 4 years old at my nana's house, and she used to sing, and she played the squeeze box, and she played the organ, you know, with the two organs. Yeah. And she was one of 14 siblings, I think, and not all of them survived into adulthood, but she used to get everybody together. She was the matriarch, and she would get everyone together and have these family get-togethers. So you can imagine all of those people and their significant others and their children. So there's just cousins and people everywhere. And music was how we socialised, and we would sing, and the fact that you didn't know the songs wasn't an excuse, and that you couldn't avoid it. Like you could not participate. And she used to have this big bag of percussion that she would pass around, and even when I was really, really small, she was like, it's okay if you don't know the songs, here's an egg shaker, play along and join in and participate. And, you know, for all of those, across all of those generations, half my family lived in Australia, you know, that way of kind of bringing people together. And I think that's something that I'm only realising now is baked in because of her. So in whatever jobs I did have, I still managed to bring the conversation back round to music somehow. But yeah, when it came to me going like full time in music, I'd given it a really good go at trying to have a normal life, and trying to do all the things that I felt were expected of me, and I was just miserable. And it was more of a phase in for me. So I started taking on more predominantly singing work first of all. So I started taking on more singing work, and it's a case of, you know, take any job you can get type thing. So for an artist, by today's standards, I don't know if it's fair to say I probably have quite a lot of like pub circuit function experience as well, whereas a lot of singer-songwriters that I have seen are less experienced in that. So I think that's been a blessing and a curse. But so yeah, we're taking on more more singing work, and I was signed to a couple of agencies and care homes and that kind of thing. And then I started taking on students. I did some teacher training and started taking on students and just phased it out. And I did that. So I cut down my hours with my other job, and I did that until it was costing me money to go to work. So I'm actually losing money by going to my normal job. And so yeah, it was much more of a phase in for me, and I think that is a great way of doing it. It's all too easy to just jump. But yeah, so that was kind of how it went for me.
Wow, your story was a lot longer than mine. It's interesting though. I never get bored of hearing that.
And when did you two meet? Had you been both working in music for a while before you met?
Yeah, we met in 2012. So I was working at a studio in Southampton, and one of the things that we were doing there, we were offering prizes for a national band competition. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's not going anymore. It's a band competition called Live and Unsigned, and because we were offering some prizes, some recording time, various bits and pieces, they asked us if we would like to provide a judge for one of the regional competitions in Portsmouth, and yeah, that was a weird experience. So I volunteered to do it. It was weird because I very much considered myself to be the Simon Cowell of the group. You know, if they're rubbish, I'm going to tell them.
Yeah.
I'm not going to, you know, there's no point in sugarcoating it.
Yeah.
As it turned out, that was much harder to do than I thought it was. And whilst waiting at the event, whilst waiting for everybody to turn up, the people around me, I judged once or twice before, and I knew some of the people around me, some of the other judges, and people kept mentioning this DiElle. DiElle's coming. DiElle be here soon. DiElle be here soon. And I kind of, you know, I pictured it as being the letters D and L. And I pictured this cool dude, you know, hey, DiElle's coming. DiElle will be here in a minute.
Like some kind of
just
rapper or grime artist or something.
Some super cool dude that is going to rock in any minute.
And
then suddenly this little powerhouse came stomping in. And you know, we got on really well during the day, and I learned that you know, that she was in the industry as well. And one of the things in our industry is it very much runs on relationships and networking and people that you meet and connections that you make. And so musicians are always on the clock. And so you try and kind of make connections without being, you know, hey, I might be able to help you. We might be able to play together, or we might be able to do things, or we might be able to write together, or, you know, it's all a bit, it can be all a bit frantic sometimes. But yeah, we kept in touch, and 11 years later, here we are doing this. But yeah, that was, yeah, we were both at the same event.
So Live and Unsigned used to run on, they had 3 heats for 3 different age groups, and they would do all of the shows all on the same day. So they'd run the show, and then they would sound check the next one and then run the next show. So it's a really long day, and there's loads of hanging around in between. So we were hanging around with the other judges, weren't we? Yeah, it's just a lot of time to chat, and then we stayed in touch after that.
That's funny. I think my stepsister took part in one of them as one of the singers.
It was absolutely
I vaguely
massive,
remember going to somewhere with her, and yeah.
Yeah, it was huge. It was a huge. You know, I think the finals were.
Finals at the O2.
At the O2, or yeah.
She definitely did get that far.
Yeah,
I would have remembered that.
So it was a huge. Yeah, it was a huge kind of national competition. There were heats all over the country.
And a great networking opportunity. Yeah. It's a great way. I mean, I'm not a competitive person. I don't think I've ever consciously put myself into a competition for songwriting or singing or anything like that. I don't for the people that I teach, if they want to, they have to give me the reason why this is, like, if you want to go on X Factor, I will help you, but you need to explain to me why this is what you want to do. But it was just a really great, you know, in its heyday, it was a really good networking opportunity, wasn't it? And a great way of meeting loads of local artists. And, you know, I mean, I did the auditions in Plymouth, and I think we saw 130 acts that day. And and it was a blast, wasn't it? But yeah.
That's how we met.
And did that quite quickly become into working together on music production, or
No. We so Chris is a bass player and I'm a singer, I think I've mentioned.
Twice.
And like I say, I've been a singer-songwriter for a long time before I met Chris, and I already had a bass player, and so we kept in touch. We kept in touch socially, and we just really got on the day, and we kept in touch socially, and then as that as that went on, you know, as time went on, then Greg had a baby, and my bass player, my previous bass player, he had a baby, and his responsibilities is, you know, anyone who's had a baby, your life completely changes. And he stepped away from what we were doing. And then it wasn't until, so one of my huge influences is Carole King. She's, and her album Tapestry was the album that made me realise I wanted to be a singer-songwriter. And I'd had a couple of goes at putting this sort of Tapestry act together, where we play the whole Tapestry album and other stuff written by Carole King. So for those of you who don't know who she is, you do know who she is. She wrote You've Got a Friend, Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow, The Locomotion, You Are the Reason, Celine Dion, loads of songs that you would recognise, Up on the Roof, loads of things that you would recognise. She was a songwriter. So I'm rambling about Carole King. And so I put this Tapestry act together, and Greg didn't want to do it because he doesn't do backing vocals. Well, at least back then he didn't do backing vocals, but Chris does. So that was the first sort of project that we worked on together. Really, we had this 5-piece theatre show, and we did a handful of those, and then we started playing together. So in that band was also John Gledall, who is now the third man of our trio. And so we started playing together live, first of all, in the first instance. And then, and then when Greg had the baby, he also stepped away from the teaching side. So I have a teaching company, and Greg was working there. And so Chris took over Greg's students. And we did that for ages before the film thing popped up, didn't we?
Yeah.
Couple of years maybe.
Yeah I think that's fair.
So we were sort of gigging together and teaching together and all of that jazz.
And then the film thing was just started out as a bit of an accident, didn't it?
It was a massive accident. Yeah.
Was it something you approached, or was something that approached you?
We had absolutely no prior plan, no prior thought. It got to the stage where, I mean this with love, neither of us are what you would call young. And I sort of became aware that a lot of modern music, like I think most generations do, the modern music wasn't really for us. We're not very good at it. We don't really understand it. It's not aimed at us. And so kind of figured in the sort of whole writing and recording kind of field, we'll leave that stuff to the people who know what they're doing, and we'll carry on writing the kind of music that we liked. And Dee was writing a lot, And then one day we had a message on Twitter, of all things, from a lady in the States who was a film producer. And she sent a message that just said, really like this song, this one particular song that Dee had put on the Twitter page. We'd love to use it in a film if we could. And so we both kind of, there's a mantra. Let
me think about that for a second.
There's a mantra that we kind of use quite a lot, which is a quote from Richard Branson, which says, if you're not sure if you should do something or not, say yes and then figure it out afterwards. So of course we both said, yeah, let's do that. Yeah, that's fine. And they sent us over the paperwork and everything to use the song, and we didn't hear from them again for months, really. Not specifically about this project. And then they came back to us and said, actually, we'd like you to score the whole film. And so we both kind of looked at each other and said, okay, we can do that with our laptop and our interface. And
we didn't even have a studio then.
And and that's really how it started. And I think I think there is a tendency nowadays to we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know what the right way to do it was. We didn't know what the cool way to do it was, but we did know how to write music, and we learned how to get that music into our computer and then what to do with it afterwards. And there are nowadays, I mean, the internet for me is a double-edged sword. I'm really glad there wasn't YouTube when I was a kid, because I'm sure there'd be some stupid stuff that I did on there. But then I wish there had been YouTube when I was a kid, because there are so many great packets of information. If you don't know how to do something, look it up on YouTube and somebody will be able to show you how to do it.
And TikTok now.
And Instagram Reels, and there's just, if you can cut through the bump, through the stuff that, isn't necessarily factually accurate, but there's an awful lot of stuff out there. We learned how to do it. We wrote some bits and pieces for the movie, and that's really when the film thing started. And we discovered that actually, having said that all of that kind of modern pop music wasn't really where we were, we discovered two things. We're much better at film scoring and film writing and cinematic writing than we are pop writing. And
speak for yourself.
And the money, the financial reward for it is better.
Right.
It's better. Everybody knows it's common knowledge how much artists get paid for streams on things like Spotify, and you can spend hundreds and maybe even thousands of pounds on recording a song and put it up on Spotify, and you get like 0.007 of a pence per stream. I don't know what the answer is. That's a debate for another day. But if you can, the idea. I mean, it is our living at the end of the day, and it is something that we have managed to monetize and make that part of what we do. Make the movie stuff part of what we do. But we came to it by accident. I'm trying to think of a better word than by accident, but I don't think there is one.
It really was. It was not on my radar at all. I think because of my experience at school, I have always felt like I'm never going to be good enough. Everybody else knows better than me about everything. Like, everybody is a better musician than me. Everybody's a better songwriter than me. Everybody's a better singer than me. But I just loved music. I was just obsessed with music. And there was no way on God's green earth that I ever thought I would be good enough to score music for films. And then it just came out of nowhere. And I just thought, this is too good an opportunity to turn down, and yeah, like I say, the first thing that happened was she picked a track off my 2014 album, for the closing credits of the film, and then through conversation, she said that she was looking for an artist to do the whole score, and yeah, and I did what Chris said and just said, look, Okay,
we'll do it.
I'll work out how to do that, later. But cinematic is a word that has been used to describe my music for a long time, and that never occurred to me. And it did open up a lot of doors for, I think what Chris is trying to say is that it gave us an avenue to pursue where we could grow old gracefully. That anybody who works in creative industry, I think you're very, very lucky if you don't have to have multiple streams of income. Like we're all juggling various different streams of income, and the money at the moment, even for your really, really big artists like Beyonce and et al, the money for them is not in the sale of music. They earn, Beyonce earns, I think, the bulk of her income from her clothing brand and perfume and merchandising and all that kind of thing. That's where the money comes from. And it just opened up this whole world. And I had my reservations about whether or not I was going to be able to do it. And I mean, never interested in instrument. I'm a singer. I was never interested in instrumental music. And we just had a little bit of a crack at it with this first lady who seemed to be really nice, and she was very friendly, and she was, very very nurturing of my inner child that is my artistic spirit, and provided an environment where it was okay to have a go. And very quickly we realised that actually we're really good at this. And it comes back to those same skills that we've both been honing our whole lives. Songwriting is about storytelling. It's about communicating emotion through music, and scoring for film exactly the same thing. You just getting a handle for the tone and the twists and turns in the story, and what kind of atmosphere you're trying to create with the film. We can do that. We know how to do that with music. What we didn't know how to do was how to press the buttons and make the studio work and all of the technical stuff. Because both of us, whenever Chris has been in studio since he was 17. I was probably the same age, but not so frequently. There's always been somebody else. Like we have lovely Aaron here today, pressing the buttons for us, looking after all the technical stuff. So that, that was a massive learning curve. But it was what I found is that I just love it. I just love the creative process. It's amazing, and it's a completely the creative process for me is very different to writing songs in terms of the methods that I use and how I go about doing it. And I'm just really lucky that we had Jade, we still work with her today, nurture me through that process, and I had somebody who I could go to and just say, is this okay? Without fear of, I'm going to lose this job, I'm going to blow this, I'm going to, that second guessing is really counterproductive in a creative environment. Rachel's nodding, but yeah. It really was a complete fluke. That's why I said to you a couple of days ago, I don't really have tips for composers, because if the question is how do you get into composition, it's like I wouldn't recommend that you try and replicate what we did, because there's no way that you can guarantee that would happen. It was a bolt out of the blue, and I'm very, very grateful for it, and we took that opportunity and ran with it. But in terms, I have no advice for
Well, the thing is, I think if you want to write music for films, what you don't really do is write music for films, if that makes sense. If you sit down at your piano or with your guitar or whatever instrument you play and you say, right, today I'm going to write a song that I think might be in a spy movie, but that's always going to kind of taint your creative direction. If you want to make music, whether you want to be a pop star, whether you want to write for film, whatever you want to do is make music, write music, produce music, the music that you love. Because we do get jobs where it's not our thing. We've written for K-pop artists, and having said what I said earlier about not pop music, this is why Dee said you speak for yourself, because we did we write for K-pop artists.
Some bangers,
but it's
they're just not. But it's just
not.
Spotify.
We did a thing for a video game recently, which was just a kind of general theme for a zombie kind of apocalypse video game, and neither of us are gamers. Neither of us are particularly, well, we're not kind of zombie movie genre kind of fans. And so sometimes if one of the things I say to musicians and some of my students is if you listen to all kinds of music, then you have an appreciation of that. If we talk about heavy metal music, we all know what the essence of that is. And if we talk about disco, we all know what the elements of that is. And so we try and kind of get a handle on some of these elements that we're not so sure of. So we did watch a few kind of zombie things, and just to try and what are the key elements of this stuff. And we wrote a theme for this video game, and we were quite pleased with it. And we sent it off, and just for some feedback, say, look, this is what we've done so far. What do you think? And they came back to us and said, oh no, we can't use that. So why not? What have we done? They're like, have you heard the theme for the Resident Evil series? And we're like, no, we haven't. And they played it, and it's almost identical. And we genuinely
hadn't heard it. We didn't know it. So sometimes it goes wrong. We stumbled on something. Yeah. But it's every day is different, and there are things that we're learning as we go. Even now. One of the things we learned very early on was, things take so long. Things take so long, like years mainly. We'll get an idea for a movie or a script or a general layout, and we can do some themes, some character themes, maybe opening themes, closing themes, and we get quite excited. We get quite into the project, and it can be years before. I do find that difficult.
It's immensely frustrating. Some of
if you're an instant gratification musician, don't go there, because it takes such a long time.
And sometimes we've worked on films that to this day haven't been made. There are so many things that have to fall into place for films to get made. And sometimes they don't, and sometimes they do.
We've had some really high profile, very near misses as well. And that is difficult because you've got to have a good poker face. We've got this insane project on our studio computer, and then I've got to go and do a choir practice. Can't tell you not, because it's all a non-disclosure agreement, so you're not allowed to, you can't tell anyone. So yeah, that was that's difficult as well. You have to get good at keeping secrets and compartmentalizing. I have to as well. I have to really put it in a different box in my mind.
We're both sitting in our studio with a trailer featuring
someone you would
double
know.
A-list Hollywood celebrity, just sitting looking at each other in our studio, like giggling like children. Oh my god! But and then things don't come off, and it's, to start with, that can be quite difficult, even if sometimes we've done a lot of work and the project doesn't come off, and sometimes we haven't done anything, but we've been assured things are going to happen, and we've been given things to work on, and we've been told things that are going to happen in the future, and then they don't. We took a few blows before we kind of got comfortable with, okay, this is just what happens. And it's a bit better now. But every time though, if we get a project land on our desk, we never start from the standpoint of this will probably not happen. Even if there are things about it that maybe take you down that route of thinking this is never going to happen. We start from the point of this is definitely going to happen, and we're going to make this amazing. And I think because of that, what we tend to do is we tend to get work kind of because of the attitude of that, rather than people saying, well, shall we get Chris and Dee on it? Well, they probably won't be that into it to start. We don't want that attitude. We want to hit the ground running. We get stuck in, ask the right questions, get the right information, start sending some things off, even really kind of sketchy, loose ideas, get them sent off, and that seems to stand us in good stead a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, going back to Chris's point earlier about networking and stuff, once we started working with Jade, she started passing us around to all of her other indie film friends, and of course she knows somebody who's making a film who's almost finished, and he's got a couple of things that he desperately needs, and would we possibly at all be able to do a couple of orchestral themes for this film that he's doing? And before you know it, I'm on the red carpet in LA for a completely different film. And so it's just, you just it never does what you think it's going to do. But no. I'm going to let Rachel say something.
well, Chris started to get into it a bit there. I guess it's probably different per project, but let's just say someone's come to you and said, I want you to make the score. What's that next step for you? Is it about research? Is there a meeting to discuss what they want, or do they just go, I want this and this is the genre? What's your sort of first steps?
So depending on where it's come from, we have a sort of process that we go through. So there are some people that approach us because they know me. There are some people that approach us because they know Chris. We're starting to get more of a reputation as a composition team now, but because of our respective careers, it tends to be that the producer will know one or other of us. So if it's somebody that knows me, they usually will say something like, I heard this piece of music that you did, what sometimes they say is, I heard some of your music online and would really like you to do the score. Now, if anyone has ever listened to my Bandcamp, my Spotify or anything, my body of work is extremely varied. So my first conversation with them is, which one?
Yeah,
which
sure.
bit? Like, was it a reggae track? Was it the screaming horror thing? So to try and get a clearer idea of what it is that they want. There's always a discussion about time frame, budget, and that kind of stuff. So, is it an indie project? I mean, we're very, like Chris said, we're very positive with everything that comes our way. So if we possibly can work on something and we want to work on something, we will try our hardest to make that happen. So sometimes it's micro budget, sometimes it's no budget, sometimes it's royalties only and all of that. So all of those things, I have to get an understanding of where the other people are coming from. And also, if it's somebody who we don't know massively well, you always have to protect yourself from being taken advantage of. So I want to know what kind of skin they've got in the game, what they're putting in, what their sort of timeframes are, how much have they put themselves out before they've come to us. And we're really keen to work with people who want to get stuff done, who want to make stuff. And so there's that discussion about, because it has a massive influence on what we can actually do. Very much like, is it Zoe, the illustrator?
Sally.
Sorry, Sally. Sally, when she came to talk to you, she said the same thing, didn't she? That it depends on, you have to sort of work out how much time you can put to whatever the project is. So we have that sort of discussion. And then I like to get a reference. So with songwriting, we would call it a reference track. So if you're writing a track with somebody, or if I'm going into a songwriting session with somebody, or like, give me a reference track. Like, what do you want it to sound in the ballpark like? Mm-hmm. So sometimes people come to us and they say, right, we're doing a war film. We'd really love you to do the score. I'm like, okay, so is that Dad's Army or Saving Private Ryan. Like, just give me a general feeling for the tone of it. You know, is it Good Night Sweetheart? Is it Hello? Is it, you know, just give me a tone of what you want what does it feel like? What does the film feel like? And then what happens to me is that pretty much as soon as people start telling me the story, I hear music.
Okay.
So that first spark, I like to get down as quickly as possible, even just for my own reference. So I'll get down my my initial ideas, and then we usually there's a little bit of an exchange of, here's the thing I did, you know, just as a line in the sand, you know, up, down, left, right, more, less. How does this feel for you? And have a little bit of back and forth with the directors about, yeah, what it is that they want, and how close we are to it. There's always the best projects. There's always a winnowing process for me. It's not like, here's a music, I've done it, there it is. I always want that feedback, so that we know that it's been a collaborative process and that they're getting the score that they want. And like I was saying that earlier about it coming from a completely different place to songwriting, that's the main difference for me, is that I don't see it as, it's not my music. I am the conduit through which you are getting your score. So you tell me what it is that you want, and then the skills that we have are to talk to people who don't have musical language, or perhaps aren't overly musical, or particularly with Jade, she says, like, she sees, whereas I don't, I'm not a visual person at all. She sees the film, but she doesn't hear it. And that's why we're a good team, because I don't see the film, but I hear it. And through conversation, managed to sort of tease it out of the director to bring that vision to life. And I love that process. I love the fact that it's like, I think you're saying, you know, I think I know what you're saying, even if you don't know what you're saying, sort of thing. I love that. I love that part of it. And then it's just down to time frame. It's down to the inevitable setbacks that always get thrown in the way, particularly with indie films. There's always something will go wrong, or, you know, somebody gets sick, or, you know, all of the things that happen, the inevitable setbacks, and then winnowing down.
And sometimes, you know, depending on the project, sometimes Dee will hear something straight away. I've got this. I know what I want. I know what I want to do, and she'll get that down, as she's already said, and then we'll bounce it around afterwards, add some things in. We're in that scenario, I'll kind of take on a more of a technical role. I'll then make sure that it sounds good, make sure that it all lines up, make sure the overall sound is good. And other times, I hear something straight away. I tend to, I don't know if this really varies from what you said, Dee, but I kind of tend to hear like a completed thing. I tend to hear a whole, what's the word, like a soundscape. I tend to hear the whole thing. I hear the instruments and I hear the instrumentation, and whereas I don't know if you necessarily
sometimes
hear some elements first, but
what I think is really interesting is that if it's somebody that it does tend to be the people who've approached you get that and I don't, and the people who've approached me, it's the other way around. So we do kind of,
and I don't know if that is because by the time we actually sit down in the studio, we have respectively had conversations with those people up till that point, because we don't necessarily get an email saying, you know, can you score our film? And you go, we've got this film to do, and we sit in the studio. So quite often, maybe that's the reason, because we've had conversations up till that point. Yeah, it can work both ways. Sometimes each of us in turn have kind of sat in front of the piano and gone, I'm not really getting anything at the moment, and then the other one will go, hang on, I've got something.
We have this really lovely process where we just let the other one work until you get stuck, and then you're like, right, do you want to sit here? And then and then that one goes to make a coffee, and you know the other one will take over. So we're good at batting it back to each other.
Yeah, and even to the point. So we've been working with funny enough, with an old school friend of mine. We were friends at school. He's a scriptwriter, a writer, and author in Essex, a horror writer called Simon Cluett. And we went to school together, and we were friends at school, and like often drifted apart after school. But social media, the wonders of social media, brought us back together. And we've done some work with Simon on a few of his films, and one of the tracks in particular, I did a piece for, and really we could sort of hear this kind of vocal wash, these sort of ethereal oohs and ahs, and so we stuck Dee in front of a microphone and let her rip, and when I sent the track off to Simon, even though Simon had given me quite a detailed brief on what he wanted, he came back and he said, actually, hearing Dee's oohs and ahs, I've had a rethink about the scene, and I'm going to reshoot the scene. It's a different direction.
Wow.
So that was quite nice. That something that we'd done had made him think, actually, I like that. I'm going to reshoot the scene.
He added like a whole montage with that in the foreground.
We weren't really used to that.
No, and I think that was a really nice experience of sort of really feeling like you're under the hood of making the film. That I think a lot of the time, when we first started walking into this world, I would talk to anybody who I felt had more experience, just to like, what do I do, and they would say, right, this is what normally happens, and you get the film and it's a picture lock of blah blah blah. So that's not what normally happens for us, and so it's not like the film is done and we're putting the music on afterwards. That by having this back and forth with the director, we're actually influencing what happened. And he shot extra scenes because of that, and we actually got production credit for that.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. Yeah,
I guess that's the thing, like the interplay between visual creatives and audio creatives. That something, they do something, it sparks an idea. We do something, it sparks an idea back to them, and that's a lovely process. I love it. Creative process.
And so, are you getting sent scenes, or I guess, does it depend on how early you've been brought in? Are you getting picture locks, as you say, that you're watching while you compose, or you think about it away?
Yes, is the answer. Yeah. Yes, we're getting
all of the above.
All of the above.
Yeah.
We get early scripts. We get trailers. We get loosely filmed scenes. We get general flavors, and
we get a really specific brief for something really weird. Like, can you do, I'm thinking of Mr. Big Stuff.
Okay.
So trailerizing is a whole nother business. Can you do a trailerized version of in a creepy horror style of this 70s massive soul hit?
Okay.
So so it's a cover, you've got to do it in a horror soundscape, and it has to be trailerized, which means, so it completely baffled me to discover that when they do music for trailers for big movies, they don't use the music that's in the film. Like, why don't you do that? Completely different business. So there's a whole nother industry. So in LA, so because of this first producer that we were in touch with, all of it was over in LA to start with. So we were discovering that these trailer houses, their whole business is making the trailers and sourcing the music and having specific music made for those trailers. And to trailerize something means that it's 3 acts of 45 seconds each. So that doesn't, if you're musical, that doesn't count. That doesn't take into account. You have to make that map to tempo, time signature. It's got to be 45 seconds. So it doesn't matter if it's not 16 bars or if it doesn't add up musically. It's got to be 45 seconds. And that's quite a tricky process. And then go watch some trailers, because you'll hear there's 45 seconds of something, and then there's a change, and then there's 45 seconds of something else, and then there's a change. and then it's a final 45 seconds. So that is a whole nother industry that we've done. We've done a couple of things for that, but then in that instance you get a really specific brief, which I also enjoy, because they'll ask for things that you would never dream of putting together. I mean, go and listen to Mr. Big Stuff. Like, the original Mr. Big Stuff track is a like young hearts run free, like, you know, like a big 70s soul number.
Yeah.
So and this is what we did with it.
Yeah, go and listen to the original Mr. Big Stuff and then listen to that clip. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I actually briefly mentioned it to Aaron earlier when we were just chatting about things. Is do you know the film Us by Jordan Peele, the horror film? So it was the one after he made Get Out. No. But the trailer, you might know the trailer for it. They used the song "I Got 5" on it. But it's a horror film. Yeah, but it's a horror film, and the way that they break the beats down in it, like, it just worked, and then but they cut it almost like Jaws effect, like in the trailer, like just
the most profitable two notes in music history.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it I mean, it's becoming, it seems to be a thing lately, you know, taking these old songs and and reimagining them, you know. They've done it. There's a few kind of what am I trying to say, like chart, I sound like an old fart now. There's a few chart artists have taken some of these old classics like The Power of Love and things, and even some of the TV shows. I mean, Bridgerton famously takes some modern pop songs and orchestrates them. So it seems to be
Westworld did it
in popularity. And to kind of hear this kind of
advertising as well. Yeah,
this cinematic, and then suddenly you hear a melody that you recognise, or you hear a lyric and you think, oh wow, it's that song. That's amazing. Yeah. It's definitely a popular genre at the moment, if genre is the right word.
And so how different is it if a different, so say, I don't know if you've done any rom-coms or anything, but like that to working on the horrors, is it, I guess, still quite the same process? It's just the music that comes out that's different.
Yeah, we've done there's a US soap opera. It's called The Young and the Restless. It's one of the biggest kind of soap operas in the world. It's on every night of the week. It's syndicated to 27 countries. It has exceptionally low production values because they film it every day, so there's no time to reshoot things. It's terrible acting, wobbly scenes. It's brilliant. And we had a song placed in that on Christmas Eve, which was really nice. And the reason why I know it's got so low production values is because we watched it, because it had our song in it. And yeah, it's exactly that. The process isn't really significantly different that I'm trying to think, and I can't think that it's significantly different. It's just some things might be more of, I guess, what you would call classically a song. It might have more of a kind of song-like structure. Other things are just orchestral from the start. Quite often, one of the first things that comes to me, I suppose, is the palette. You know, the sounds. What are we going to use here? Are we going to use like a band kind of thing with drums and bass and guitar? And are we going to use an orchestra? Are we going to use some synthesizers? Is it going to be, in the case of the zombie thing that we did, it was what came straight away was the kind of industrial kind of feel and sound palette.
If we're talking about the same piece of music, which we may well not be, we also had quite a specific brief for that as well, didn't we? Because there was it needs to be a zombie film.
Yeah.
It needs to be zombie this.
We are.
Yada, yada, yada. And and they wanted to include the sirens that so in the States they have a lot of early, like the early warning sirens for the hurricanes and cyclones and stuff, and they wanted us to use the cyclone sound, and it really is terrifying. I think I'm both the best and worst person to do horror scores because I get scared
even to the point
so easily.
Even to the point where
I have to run away and watch Pingu videos.
I was mixing a horror theme that we'd done, and Dee came into the studio, and she walked in. She said, "Oh my God, that's horrible! What is that?" I said, "That's the song you wrote, or the piece you wrote." But in which case, that's a win.
But yeah, if you want people to feel creeped out, it's
yeah.
Well, the score's a huge part of every film, but horror in particular, like that. That's what raises the tension, isn't it? It's not you can cover your eyes, but you can still hear it.
That's true.
And they're all very different. Some classic kind of horror films are still really orchestral. We've watched some. One of the reference we did a thing, and one of the references. I always say a thing because we can never tell you about it, but. And one of the sort of references we were given were the Halloween series.
Yeah.
And again, I think I probably saw Halloween 1 when I was much younger. But there was a Halloween film it may have been more than one, that was scored by Rob Zombie, and that was the reference we were given, and so we then had to watch those just to get an idea of what that was, and so those are a lot more rock based kind of the scores are a lot more rock based, so even within the genre you can have multiple different kind of sounds and palettes and general feels. People think of film scoring predominantly as an orchestral kind of journey, but it really doesn't have to be. A lot of films, particularly now that music technology and recording technology and all of those things are available to anybody with a laptop. People can make some amazing music with a couple of synthesizers that are built into your laptop and make a film score that way. And there are films that are purely done by one guy or one girl with a laptop. And they're just as valid, just as relevant, and sometimes just as amazing.
I do love a rom-com because I think we are getting a bit of a reputation as being like horror zombie scorers, and like I say, that genre is great because it's another character. Like the score is another character in the film. It's great because the music is such a big player. My nervous system. It gets a bit overloaded sometimes, and we had a really lovely something else that's in development, a really lovely script sent through that was the story is quite harrowing actually, but it's set in Hawaii, and she wanted it all with ukulele, so I play ukulele as well, and she wanted it all, the score made out of ukulele. So I'm like, this is right up my street. We can do this, and so that was a nice bit of a bit of light relief. But yeah, I would love
so
a little bit more.
Film producers listening, please send DL some rom-com.
Please send us some rom-coms.
Anything with preferably a happy ending, and nobody getting killed or blown up or eaten by zombies. I'm in. I'm in, definitely. Yeah, and it's one of the things I love about it is the variety. I think it's something I've struggled with as an artist. Like I say, that one of the things that has been a blessing and a curse is that I've done so many different things, and marketing wise, it's much easier to just stick your flag in the sand and stay there. But I just couldn't, I've got like 3 studio albums and they are all drastically different from each other. Again, our live show is pretty different. So the scoring side of it is I love to be challenged. Again, a friend asked me recently, like, what's your favourite genre to score? And I said, my favourite thing is to be challenged. Like, I really love it when people put 2 things together that I would never have put together. And one example being the vampire thing. We were asked to do a pitch for a vampire movie where it was all what he really wanted was toccata and fugue in D minor with trip hop drums.
That doesn't mean anything to me.
And it was like
it's a very famous. Everybody knows that, right? Nobody knows what it's called. But everybody knows it, right?
Everybody knows that. Yeah, it's like probably the only piece of organ music that maybe most people in the street will be able to hum to you. And with this sort of dubstep, really, really modern electronic drums, and I was like, there is no way I would have put those two things together, but it actually worked really, really well because it sounds like being chased by a vampire and having a heart attack. That's what it sounds like. And it's, so yeah, I really enjoy whatever that is. I enjoy the creative challenge of researching those things.
You've got the book in your hand there. Did you want to talk about that?
So this was Simon Cluett. Chris was talking earlier about Simon. Tales from the Dark Library by Simon Cluett. This is a book of short stories that Simon's written, and the ones that were, and they're all horror, horror, supernatural, thriller,
unnerving kind of stories,
creepy stories, and a handful of these we've made into short films, and they usually get screened at Horror on Sea Film Festival in Essex. A lot of those stories in that book, you would need a lot of special effects and like a big kind of sci-fi budget and all of that, but some of the stories that we were able to make with the resources available, we've scored for. So they
one of which was made during lockdown, and it's very interesting that Simon actually has a gun battle with himself because he wasn't able to have other actors with him at the time. They're very creative shooting from Simon. Literally.
Was that the one that you did Spanish?
Herb.
I was going to say Flea, but that's a different piece of music, isn't it?
Yeah. There was a piece of music that I did that was one of the song references was an old song called Spanish Flea, and the other one being an old artist called Herb Albert, who was kind of big in the 70s with a sort of, they used to call it Tijuana brass. It's like a Mexican kind of all that mariachi stuff, and so we did a piece called that smashed those two things together and called it Spanish Herb, which sounds like a drug reference, but it really isn't. It was literally just Spanish Flea and Herb Albert smashed together. So we can play some of that.
Can you tell Chris's dad was a trumpet player?
Yeah, and that was something that originally Simon had said what we needed was a piece of music that was playing on the radio whilst a character in the film was chopping up a body, and so it needed to be a real kind of juxtaposition.
Yeah.
He didn't want some. It was as if the guy or girl, I'm not sure who the character was, had just like turned the radio on and just to cover the noise of what they were doing. And it was Simon's suggestion that we mix Spanish Flea and Herb Albert, and
I think he particularly wanted something grotesquely inappropriate, didn't he? Like it was meant to be.
It was meant to be a real clash of what
really awful.
Yeah,
yeah, and we couldn't, we can't. You obviously can't use anything that's actually a song because there are legal implications to that. So we couldn't use anything that was too twee or poppy or recognisable, or indeed Spanish Flea we couldn't use because there are legal implications to that. So we have to be careful what we do, and there are there's a whole industry of musicologists nowadays whose sole job is to decide whether your music is original or whether it is plagiarism. as we've seen with some recent court cases with Ed Sheeran in particular is one I remember. So you do have to be careful that your influences and your suggested tracks don't play too big a part. I mean, Mr. Big Stuff was okay because we had permission to do that. But you do have to be careful that you don't cross the line. And it is, as we've learned recently from some high profile court cases, the line is very, very, very blurry, and it's very difficult to decide whether a song is influenced by or is partially contained within another piece of music. And it is something that we do think about. We do, we're all, I think we've all been in that place where you listen to a song and you think, oh, that sounds exactly like the other one. Or, there are chord progressions. You can't copyright a chord progression. So this is why many songs follow the same chord patterns. But as soon as you start getting lyrically, if the words "I love you" were copyrighted, there would be no more songs ever. But you get to a point where somebody else makes a decision as to whether your song has been influenced by something else or is a plagiarized copy of something else. And even we get random copyright infringement notices from YouTube for songs that we've written. So people, says, one of the big...
They mute my music on my own videos.
One of the big three record companies say, we suspect that this is a copyright infringement. It's like, it's our song. So, it is something we have to be careful of. So when we do get influences and we get guide tracks and we get kind of suggested tracks, we want it to sound a bit like this. We want it to sound a lot like this. Again, as I was talking about earlier with kind of instrumentation and stuff, you have to decide, okay, what are the elements of that song that I can include? If they wanted it to sound like an Ed Sheeran tune, where you can go, well, okay, well, we've obviously got a vocal and a guitar predominantly, we'll go with that. But it's a very, very dangerous grey area.
That's part of the process, though, isn't it? That's our part of our job, is to take those influences. So Rachel's asked us to do a score, and she says, I want it to sound like this, this, and this, and mush them together and come up with something that gives that same vibe and gives that same creates that same atmosphere without crossing the line. And also, we are increasingly finding ourselves in a position of advising people that you can't some of the things that you've suggested, you're either going to have to pay the licensing fee for that, or we can't use it. That's something that I think people don't realise. So one of the scripts that we got in particular referenced in the dialogue a song that's like, that is, if you keep that line in the script, and this is none of my business really as a composer, it's not for me to advise you on the script, but I say, if you keep that is the whole of your budget for this whole film to pay for that. So I think that's something that maybe script writers and indie, some indie creators just don't realise that there's a whole big world of mess in there as well.
Do you see a lot of scripts that will say, and they turn the radio on and it's playing this song, and is that when you're thinking you're not going to get that song? Do you see it, or does it just say a song plays?
Both, yeah. There are both. There's the turning on the radio, and or this song's playing in the background.
Jazz music plays, or
jazz music plays, or and the one I'm thinking of in particular again is a script that's in development, so I can't say too much about it, but it's the repeated reference of this one song that keeps coming up, and it's like integral to the story, so you need to rewrite this whole thing, or
get the license,
come up with
or you
probably $100,000 to pay for that,
because it's like
song.
it's like quite often, depending on
is easier,
depending on what the song is, and depending on how big the artist is and how big the production house is. Quite often, if you ask, they'll let you, but if you don't ask, it's there's an old phrase, it's better to ask for forgiveness than for permission. Well, definitely not.
Does not in this situation.
Definitely doesn't work because you know, if you ask for permission and you say, you know, we're doing this piece, we'd like this piece playing on the radio, unless it's you know, the trouble is with some huge pieces of music, you know, pick anyone, Beyonce, pick anyone like that, is that if you could ring up Beyonce, she would probably say, yeah, use my pick. But because it's not her decision and you've got production houses and record labels and management deals and all sorts, if you ask, normally they'll give you permission. If you don't ask and they find out, it can be quite serious.
I would just stay completely clear of it. If you don't have permission, you can seriously get into a lot of trouble.
And unless you absolutely categorically have to have that song in it for your film to make any sense whatsoever, leave it alone. Definitely leave it alone. It's just not.
You need to pay the licensing fee.
Yeah.
If you want to be able to show the film to anyone other than your mum.
Yeah. So when we get guide tracks and we get influence tracks and we get, you know, I want it to sound like this or sound like this song or sound like this artist or sound like this genre or this period, you know, any of those things, I mean, to be fair, most of the time you can avoid it because all you need are the elements. But sometimes you do have to stop yourself and go, yeah, this is sounding a little bit like this tune or that tune. And I mean, even we did some work recently on some orchestral arrangements that were specifically for a certain period in time, and I was quite proud of my drums and percussion track, and we sent the song off. It was an orchestral arrangement, and the producer came back and said, yeah, no, they didn't have those instruments in the 17th century. And then we had to turn those off. So we're not
foolproof.
We're not foolproof. Yeah, we're not foolproof.
This is a reason why I particularly like to be involved at an early stage, because if whoever's making the film, so if a producer or a director or a writer has got a specific piece of music in mind and they get wedded to that idea, it is nigh on impossible to give them something that they like equally as much. So I like to be, we're going to make this film, here's a synopsis. I like to be the next phone call, to be honest. So before the script is even finished, and then we can start throwing some ideas around and get a soundscape for the film, even just little bits, as the film is getting developed. So that is the soundtrack that's in the director's mind while they're making it. If it gets to the point where like they turn on the radio and Easy on Me by DiElle is playing, it doesn't matter what we do, it doesn't matter how good the music is that we do, it never replaces that vision. It always feels like a compromise. So I think it's a really good idea to get, if you're going to use a composer, to have them on board early doors. Yeah.
I've heard it before. With editors, sometimes they might use like temporary tracks while they're editing, but then again, the director will see it and like that, and then basically when it then comes to the composer, they just want them to recreate.
Just do that.
Yeah. It's a really tricky one. I think this is one of the things that like Hans Zimmer says, that he would, even some of the films that he's worked on, they play the music on the set before they shoot the scene. So some of the music is influencing the actors rather than the other way around. So that tone is kind of being baked into the whole thing. That's obviously not practical for a lot of the work that we do, because most of the time it's all happening over there on the other side of the world. But yeah, it's a really, that's the main reason, one of the main reasons why I really like to get involved early on, because you can just head off that whole problem.
As a director, I've approached music in my films probably differently every time I've made a film. I think every time I've made a film, I don't necessarily do it the same way. You start in a different place. So sometimes it has just been, I've edited it and now I'm going to go try and find some music. Sometimes it has been, with one of my films, Losing Face, I think I had the composer as one of the first people attached to the project, and he ended up, the whole score is just played on piano,
And we eventually just like hired out a room in a local college, which had a big piano in it, and I played the film for him, and he played it live, and we recorded it a few times, and that was the score. Other times I've had for a film taken DiElle, I was looking for crew, and then the composer was like, "Oh, do you need a composer?" And at that point I hadn't thought about it, but I was like, "Oh yeah, cool." So then we were having those conversations. So I just happened to have a playlist made from when I was writing that I was listening to, so I just sent that to him as the examples. That composer Justin Wetherill is actually the one that made the theme for Blue Moggy for the podcast, so that's cool that we've been able to work on a couple of projects now.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so it is, for me it's different. So you want to be the first person involved, or really early?
Ideally, ideally I like to be top 5, because then you're really involved, for personal reasons as well. I like to feel like we're involved. I'm a team player. I like to feel like we're involved with the making of the film, and that we're not just painting on it after it's done. Sometimes there are some elements of it, I think particularly with the incidentals and scene changes and stuff like that you have to do after the filming's been done, but the big pieces of what the opening credits, closing credits, big themes, montages, stuff like that, where the music is one of the key players, you can be working on that while all the other ideas are going along, and you can be much more part of the team. That there, like I say, there's so many things that we've come from where people are looking for a replacement for a placeholder that is an insanely famous piece of music. It's like it doesn't. You shot me in the foot because there's nothing I can do. Is gonna, unless on occasion we've just given them something completely different. I said, just throwing this out there. How about this? And very occasionally that works. But yeah, I think it can be such. You can use the music as so much part of the storytelling. You can actually save yourself a lot of work, I think, by having a composer on board really early days. I think you're the other way around, aren't you? Chris likes it to be finished.
I think in an ideal world, I agree with everything that you just said about being involved in the making of the film and being part of the team. I don't just want to swan in at the end and steal all the glory.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to imply that.
No. But no. I know you didn't. But that I agree with all of that. But for me, I like to have the film in front of me so that I can see what I need to do, where it needs to be, what some of the big, as you call them, the big pieces are, the themes, the character themes, that I'm a lot more comfortable with that, because I think if I know that the film isn't finished, there's a little gland in my brain that kind of goes, well, you don't need to worry about this too much, because you're going to have to do this again anyway. So for some of the bits where maybe they're a little bit more up-tempo, or they're not quite so washy and paddy because there are things happening on the screen, I'm thinking, well, if I do this piece where suddenly it's very aggressive and it's very forceful, and when they recut the film, it's in the wrong place, I have this recurring nightmare that I'm sitting in the cinema watching a film and my music doesn't line up, and suddenly something happens on the screen and the music is a few seconds behind it. It's just, people have nightmares about their teeth falling out and being naked in public and stuff. That's my nightmare, that my music doesn't line up with the film and I'm sitting in the cinema. So in an ideal world, with all things being equal, I think I would prefer to be the last thing that happens. But,
that's interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So
I want it to be the last thing that happens as well. I want to be like just the last person that gets it before you send it back to for the last sweep.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that is really difficult about film scoring is that the creative process and the editing process get mashed together to an unrecognisable state sometimes, and depending on what phase you're in with the film and what the deadline is and how quickly you need to get it back, you might not be able to distinguish between those two things. And for me, they are very, very different processes. So lots of people across all kinds of different creative arts will agree with me when I say the creative process is fast. And the general advice that I was always given is that when you're in that state of creative flow, get out of the way, let it happen, let it all come, we can tidy it up later. And the editing process is slow. So if you're trying to edit when you're in a state of creative flow, it is probably some of the most frustrated mind states I've ever experienced. That I find it really, really difficult to do those two things. Like I need to have at least some creative space, and then go back and tidy it up. And sometimes there just isn't time to do that. Sometimes you have to do both at once, and I do find that a bit of a passion killer.
Yeah, I do that when I'm writing. I don't think about me as a director, or I know some people write for the edit. I don't. I'm just focused on the writing, and then it's the director's problem in the future, me in the future, to work out how I'm going to make that happen. Because if I am trying to edit while I'm writing, it's just going to stall. Because I'm going to go, well, I can't do that.
And you come back at it in a different state of mind, don't you? It is, when we are in a state of creative flow, it is a different state of consciousness.
Yeah.
It is like an alpha wave state of consciousness, where it's like meditation, where you're actually processing information at a different speed in a different way. You're connecting to different parts of your brain, where the emotional center is more forward and the logical center is taking more of a backseat. And when you're editing, you're in beta waves. So it is actually a different mindset, and you come back at it with in a different frame of mind. And I can totally see that when you sit down and you're writing, don't worry about it. And even though that you're potentially creating problems for the director, who is you, in the future, that's all right, because you can come back with your beta wave problem solving hat on and okay, we can fix this and we can fix this and we can fix this. And I really, really do, at my best, I work like that. Like, just let me get into the right state of consciousness that I need to be in for the particular phase. And the thing that I do struggle with probably most, other than the fact that everything takes an age and I'm one of the most impatient people I know, those two processes get mashed up, and it's very, very difficult to tell which one you have time for and which one is very, very difficult to tell what you're doing, and that you have to do both at once, which is not my favourite way to work.
You mentioned earlier you didn't really necessarily have tips for composers, but you do have tips for filmmakers working with composers. What would the sort of advice you would have? Do you want them to be hands-on, this is exactly what I want, or do you want a bit of freedom? Do you want to tell them what they want?
So tips for certainly. I mean, I can certainly speak to if you haven't worked with a composer before, or certainly if you haven't worked with us before, some stuff to kind of things that we can stack up to make that go well. I don't, like I say, I see certainly my process as it's my job to be the conduit through which your score is made. So if you have ideas and if you have input and if you have I want it to sound like this and all of that, I'm all happy with that. If you say absolutely nothing, that's not massively helpful. Sometimes I think it's more useful, I think, if people have had a little bit of experience with music. This happens across the board. People use words that they don't really understand what they mean, and that can be quite difficult. It's sort of like a little bit of knowledge being a dangerous thing. Personally, I just prefer, give me the human words. I can tell you what scale we need to use to make that happen, but tell me the human words. What do you want it to feel like? Do you want to feel comforted? Do you want this to feel romantic? Do you want to, describe how the characters feel at this point? And I like a kind of very loose reference of a film for tone. You can have a horror film that's got some comedy in that's sort of got comedic elements to it, which has a massive influence on the music. And something else that we come across, particularly with indie films, is being clear about what it is that you want the composer to do. So composition is not everything to do with sound. And that's something that we've come into contact with more than once with indie films, where, editing the dialogue is a completely different skill set and a completely different job. And sound design, some of the big movies, what was that movie with the little flying saucers that go zzz? I can't even remember what it was. The guy spent 18 months designing the sound that for the spaceship, just that one sound. So if there are special effects and other sounds that are happening in your film, that doesn't necessarily come under scoring. So we can do that, but that's sort of an additional conversation that needs to happen. What I think is really cool is if you have a really cool sound design on the film and then you use elements of that in the score, that can be really sexy. It does tend to be that, when you're working on smaller projects where all of us are wearing several different hats, that, like you say, you've written the script, you're also directing it later, you're undoubtedly producing it in some way as well, and that, all of those, sometimes you might be in it as well, you might be on the screen.
I tried to avoid it, but it did happen recently.
The bigger the production gets, all of those things are different jobs. So you've got the audio guy, you've got the sound designer, you've got the score. We've also had, at the other end of the spectrum, on some really big budget things, where they've then also presented me with an artist as well, and that was a bit of a rude shock. So I'm sorry, what? So then incorporating an artist's influence, and this has happened twice, and in both instances the artist was integral to the funding of the film, so we needed to have that person. Right. And our role then changes again as to how we then work with the artist and create something cohesive that is then also cinematic, and all of that. So where that again is a different role. So being clear with your composer, and it's okay if you don't know, but talk to us about it, and talk to us about everything that's to do with noises. Tell us what, if you're not sure or you need help or whatever. We're, like I say, we do everything we can to help as much as we possibly can for whatever budget is available. What is really difficult is being presented with problems, which then needs to be, or just assumptions that, I thought you would just normalise the whole thing, or other things to do with audio or sound design that we haven't budgeted time for, which is then coming out of the composition time, which then has an impact on the quality of the music. So definitely my top tips for filmmakers working with a composer for the first time would be talk to us early, get us in early, and don't worry about being too specific. Have a sort of general idea of what you want the score to sound like, and use your human words to describe how you want it to feel, and keep talking. Just keep talking to us.
Yeah, we get a lot of projects where either they say words like, we want it to be despite my kind of disco and soul background, one of my least favourite words in music is the F word, funky. I hate that. I mean, don't get me wrong, yeah. I love funk music, but the word funky, I mean, can we not just like make it more funky? what does that mean? I don't know what that means. Or what we want to happen is, right, we're in the second scene where the guy comes in, we sort of want it to sort of go, that sort of thing, and we sort of look at them and go, okay, but it's even if you say, I don't know, I just want it to kind of have impact, or I want there to be like a real kind of jump up in the energy, or so those are words we can deal with, but words like bigger or more funky, or just a bit more, a bit more, no, we don't know, we don't understand what that means, and then what happens is we end up doing something and sending it back, and they go, no, not like that. Oh, sorry, was that not more? Whatever that word was you were searching for, and then it just lengthens the whole process, and so the more
be open to that dialogue. I think
the more, to use your phrase, human words we can use.
And be open to that conversation, and don't get embarrassed if you can't say specific music-y things. You don't have to do that. That's our job. But be prepared for that dialogue about describing what it is that you have in mind. If anything, sometimes people don't, and sometimes people really do draw a blank, and I ask them 5 times in 5 different ways, like, so were you thinking, just really gently, were you thinking about, was it kind of, was it a low, or was it Saving Private Ryan, or whatever? And they're like, really do come back with nothing. And on the one hand, you would think that's amazing because you've got a completely blank canvas, but then you've just got the freedom of limitations, like to actually put something in a box gives you like, right, okay, this is what you can sort of, something comes to mind quicker if you're just left with all of the possibilities in the whole world.
I think I talked about that on the first episode of the podcast with Ben, like sometimes having the limitations, that's what sparks the creativity. If you've got like a set of rules, then because if you could just make anything no rules at all, then you're just going to go down all of these different pathways and probably never land anywhere.
And the likelihood that is the same as whatever tiny seed of a vision that is in there that people do, because often they have got an idea, they just don't have the vocabulary or don't know how to, they don't know what they want until you give them something that they really don't want.
Because this is what we do, this is what we do. People assume that when we send them something, even if it's not what they kind of had pictured, they then say, well, that must be good because you know what you're doing, right? Rather than coming back and saying, no, that's not what we wanted. So sometimes I think there's a danger that things could get accepted where it's not really what they were thinking, but because we know what we're doing, that must be right. Which, that's not what we want. That's not what the filmmaker wants. That's not what anybody wants. We want you to come back and, if you really have no idea what it is you want, we'll do something and we'll send it to you. And that should be the starting point of
just to move the conversation along. That's kind of cool. That's kind of what I was thinking, or it's the opposite, and it's no, that's not what I was thinking. Both of which are valuable, both of which are powerful. And then the next thing that we do, okay, a little bit closer and a little bit closer, and it is a more time based way of working. But if the filmmaker doesn't really have an idea, that's the only way to go, is just to get something down, however loose, a few themes, a few instruments. And it could be like 15 seconds. It could be, 15, 20 seconds.
Just might take you in the right direction.
Is there a project that you haven't worked on yet that's like a dream or just something you'd really like to do?
Oh.
I just thought of about 3 things. Do you want to...
No, you start. You start.
So there have been a catalogue of near misses of things that are still on the slate, have been on the slate for 7 years. There was one project that I think was only exchanged like 2 emails about, and then nothing came of it, where I was approached to do a score for like a Dances with Wolves type thing with the Native American characters and setting, and the email was would you like to go and live with some Sioux Indian people and learn their music and make a score out of it? And I'm just like, yes. I don't know how practical that's going to be. I'm vegetarian, so I'll probably starve. I don't know how long it will take or how long, but I was like, I would love to do that project or something like that that's really immersive, where you go and, I mean, just the opportunity to like learn that whole culture of a different, just a whole culture of music and work with those people on creating something really unique, and to get to go and live with the Sioux Indians for 3 months would be really cool. But that was weirdly specific and so unlikely that it's not like, I'd really love to do a comedy, but I think that was I think about that probably once a week, and that was about oh god, at least 5 years ago, if not more than that.
I think what I would like to do is one of the very early projects in our film scoring career, if you can call it that, was a sort of crime, a bit of a kind of Silence of the Lambs type, killer on the loose kind of thing, and we did a few themes for it, and it's still in production, it's still on the slate. We talked earlier about these things taking years and years and years and years. I think I'd actually like to do that one just because it was one of the very, very early ones that we got offered.
We were cast in that as well.
And we were cast in that. We were going to be a band in a bar in one of the scenes.
We were cast, DL as self.
And I think, just because it was an early one we got asked to do, I'd actually like to see that one get made, I think. Yeah.
Still on the slate, was it Squid Games took 12 years?
Squid Games took 12 years, yeah. Yeah, it's still our one's still a baby then.
Are there any, I know you've got a load of tracks you wanted to talk about. Are there any tracks that we haven't mentioned that you'd want included?
Sirens Built to Nothing, the track is called, which is the zombie one that we were talking about, that was originally for, I was telling Rachel this early on when we got here. Originally, we put that track together for a film that was getting greenlit in February 2020, and it was about how a deadly virus was taking over the world and killing everyone, and that went out of fashion really quickly.
Yeah, they dropped that one like a hot potato.
Yeah,
I was also working on a zombie film.
Were you?
At that time.
Oh, yeah. God.
And the production got stopped because of COVID.
Yeah.
Seriously poor taste, like 6 weeks later.
Yeah. People haven't got the stomach for a virus film now.
No.
Need to put some distance between that and us.
But yeah, that piece of music is now is being used for a preppers game. So that's I can tell you it's press X to play games, and that's in production at the moment. So
something we can
tell you, and it's called Get Prepped, and it's one of these, like, I don't know, I'm not good at games, but what's the thing where they build things? Minecraft. It's like that, but with zombies.
Okay.
Prepping for the apocalypse.
Well, that sounds like a game I would play too.
If you're from Chicago, brace yourself.
That definitely sounds like something that I would play.
What about the
we can play the music.
The American soap?
Yeah. So this was opening a pitch we did for opening credits for a soap opera.
American family friendly soap opera. Now, when we spoke earlier about copyright issues, nothing about that song at all, but it was definitely that final chord at the end was definitely inspired by the theme tune to 2.5 Men.
Yeah.
When they do men at the end,
and the brief was that it was particularly meant to have like a retro feel where the characters come on and they wave.
I could literally picture that while I was listening to it. Yeah,
our work here is done. Yeah, it's just a family friendly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I was just said they turn their heads to the camera.
Yeah, a bit of a kind of Cosby Show kind of.
I particularly wanted to play that one because everything else that we've played, I think, is really creepy.
Well, that's why I suggested it, just because it's something different. Yeah.
I mean, that one up against the previous one is just, showing diversity on our work. And the other thing that I brought was the track that was picked. The track from my album that was picked by the producer in the first place.
So the one that got you started in.
Journey.
This is a track called No One to Thank or Blame, and it's from it was originally on my album Fearless, which is the version that was picked by the producer. We then tinkered with it a little bit for the purposes of the film, so it was then again on my next album Together. A version that we reworked to work better with the film. So this is the version that I've got there, but this is the track.
You stand alone, no one to thank. You stand alone, no one to blame.
I can tell why that one was picked out because it is very cinematic and it's almost like sort of the final act. I could picture like a character like the final act. This is like that, quintessential moment where it's make or break, do or die sort of thing.
Yeah, thank you. It was when I put it on Fearless. As far as songwriting goes, it breaks all of the rules. Like that, there's no chorus. There's there's only one stanza of lyric. There's only like 4 lines of lyric. On an album that was full of stuff that got played on the radio, and it's like this is my indulgent arty farty track. Strings by Pete Hartley, absolutely incredible violinist and viola player. He's someone who I'm really unhelpful with. I send him things and I go, can you make it? And I make noises. All of the things that I've just said you shouldn't do.
All of the things.
Yeah, but I think me and Pete just have we just have an understanding. But and I put it on the album because I was just at that point in my life where like I've been schlepping around record labels for a long time by that point. And Fearless was my album that I made for me, and I'm like, this is where I'm going to put my, I'm going to put my stamp on this. I don't give a hoot what other people, what anybody says. Yeah, and it was a real indulgence, and I thought, I'm taking up album space on something that is like it's never going to get played on the radio. It's never probably going to see the light of day. It's one of those like arty album tracks that only the most die-hard DiElle fans will ever hear. And here you go. It's the one that blew all the doors open. And I think that the more that you talk to people about, like Chris was saying earlier about make the music that you want to make.
Yeah.
I guess it's like authenticity is a word that gets bandied around as well, but putting your heart and soul into something, it shows. It really shows. And just writing music for sync because you think you might make some money, people see through that.
Yeah,
straight away.
It's the same with films. If you've set out to make this award-winning film, it's not going to be as good as something that you just needed to say. That's something that is your voice or your viewpoint.
Absolutely,
it's so true.
It is. For us, it's as we said earlier. If you try and write something with an idea, if you sit down and say, right, this morning we're going to write a song. What should we write a song about? It's never going to be as good as the song that you hear, that the process is the other way round. You wake up in the morning and you go, I've got a song in my head. I'm going to just go into the studio and get that down, and it's always better. So yeah, we make the music that we want to make, and most of the time it fits the brief. Most of the time.
So I think we're starting to wrap up now. Is there anything that either of you two want to talk about that we haven't covered?
I suppose I want to give a shout out to Instinctive, an Archer's Journey that we're working on at the moment. So we're scoring a documentary which is about the female archery champion for Great Britain, a lady called Alison Wright, and her journey in the archer's world. So she picked up a bow when she was 50, and within a couple of years she was the champion. Wow. For GB, and she competed for Great Britain, and she is now battling cancer, and we are working on a documentary with drawing energy pictures, and Kate Lavender is producing it, and I just want to give a massive shout out to them. If it's with us at the moment, so we're scoring it at the moment. Massive shout out to Kate, who's done an incredible job in some very difficult circumstances to get this film made, and I'm extremely proud of it. It's an incredible film. If any of you guys are at a festival where it's screening, Alison is one of the most incredibly inspiring women. So yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to that film that we're working on at the us.
Well, thank you both so much for joining me.
Absolute pleasure.
On the podcast.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you to Aaron and for City Eye for letting us record here again. Woohoo! If people want to follow you or know more about what you do, where can people find you? We'll start with DiElle.
So probably the easiest thing to do is come to my Bandcamp. So it's DiElle.bandcamp, how you would expect to this one time at bandcamp.com. That's DiElle.bandcamp.com. You can listen to some music there, but there's also a contact button, so you can it links through to all of my socials, and you can send an email as well. So if you are wanting to talk in more depth about a project, do it.
And if it's me you want, I'm on all the social medias, Chris Wood Bass. Come and have a chat to us. If you've got something that you're thinking about doing, come and chat to us. We're always open to chat to people. We love getting things made, whatever your idea is, whatever your time frame, whatever your budget. If you need some advice, or if you need someone to just give you some tips or to work on your project, please don't think that things like time and budget may be an obstacle. Just come and talk to us. If we can't help you, we'll know someone who can.
We've also got a massive library of stuff that we've made for pictures that are not being used that we might be able to,
come and talk to us.
Yeah. Hook you up with.
Brilliant.
Come and have a chat.
Well, thank you both so much again.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure.
Yes. And I'll see you next time.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Well, that's almost a wrap for the Blue Moggy Podcast. Thank you for listening and to making it all the way to the end of this slightly longer episode of the podcast. It was really great to sit and chat with Chris and DiElle, chatting about film and music, and to hear their stories. It was really interesting for me, and if you enjoyed it, please make sure you like and subscribe and leave a comment if you have the option to leave a comment, depending on where you're listening to this episode. It was great to know what you are enjoying about these episodes and what you'd like to hear from, so please do get in touch with any feedback, and share it to someone that you think might enjoy these episodes. Thank you to Chris and DiElle for taking their time to come down to City Eye in Southampton to record this episode with me. You can follow DiElle at DiElle Music UK. That's DiElle Music UK on Instagram, and Chris at chriswood.bass. You go to the link tree on both of their profiles. There's a lot more links to all of the work that they do, and you can hear some music that they've made and videos and Spotify and Bandcamp and things like that. So make sure you go and follow them to find out more about what they're doing and what they're working on. And of course, I just want to say another thank you to City Eye for letting us use the sound suite to record this episode, and a massive thank you to Aaron for helping with the technical side of things during the day. Can't say too much yet about the next episode of the Blue Moggy Podcast because it hasn't actually been recorded yet, but I'm still expecting to keep to the release schedule of every other Wednesday. And I can tell you that in the coming month and a bit, you will hear from a cinematographer, you will hear from a documentary filmmaker, and you will hear from an actor and talent agent. So those are things that are coming up. I'll talk about those more once those recordings have actually happened. But if you have any questions for people working in cinematography, documentary filmmaking, acting, talent agency, please get in touch, and you can do that via social media. That's Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Blue Moggy Media, or you can go to bluemoggymedia.com to get in touch with us that way. Blue Moggy Media is in pre-production for a couple short films at the moment, which will be shot sort of early summer. So if you do follow us on social media, then you can stay up to date with what's happening with those productions. And one thing I desperately want time to focus on is my plans for a photography project that I would like to get up and running under Blue Moggy Media. So if you are a budding photographer, then please also follow us on social media so you can find out about that when that is underway. So that's Blue Moggy Media on all of the social medias. Hit like, follow, subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. Share it to someone else, and I'll catch up with you guys in a couple weeks for the next episode of the Blue Moggy Podcast. See you later.